In the quiet suburbs of Hartford, Connecticut, nestled between tree-lined streets and perfectly trimmed hedges, lived a couple who, to most, represented the picture of enduring love. Franklin and Janet Whitmore. To their neighbors, they were the kind of couple people pointed at with admiration, a husband still opening car doors for his wife of over 30 years, and a wife who always smiled warmly during Sunday church services, hand in hand with the man she married when she was just 37. Franklin, a charismatic man in his early 50s, had that kind of charm that made him hard to dislike. He was tall, clean-shaven, and always dressed in button-downs and polished shoes, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a retirement brochure. His younger age compared to Janet raised a few eyebrows at first, but over the years, any suspicion had been replaced with envy. Janet was 67, kind, elegant, and sharp, a retired elementary school teacher. She spent her days volunteering at the library and tending her rose garden. People said she had a laugh that could light up a room, and a heart even bigger than her laugh. Together, they owned a modest but charming home with ivy-covered walls and a backyard that looked like something out of Better Homes and Garden Spread. They had dinner with neighbors, hosted Christmas parties, and always made a point to donate generously to local causes. From the outside looking in, Franklin and Janet were the epitome of lasting love, the kind of love that survived decades, weathered storms, and still came out the other side hand in hand. But behind that perfect image, something darker was quietly festering. No one saw it. Not the neighbors who waved from across the fence, not the friends who toasted wine with them on summer evenings, not even a local pastor who had officiated their 25th vow renewal 2 years earlier. But Janet felt it. It started with little things. Franklin's sudden disinterest in her day-to-day stories. The long walks they once took turned shorter, then stopped altogether. He began staying out late without explanation, spending more time running errands than actually being home. When she asked questions, his answers were vague, curt, cold. At first, she thought it was just aging. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe they were just growing apart. Something that happened to older couples, right? But that theory collapsed the day she overheard him on the phone. His voice low, urgent, unfamiliar. He didn't see her standing at the hallway corner, clutching a laundry basket as he whispered, "She has no clue. Just be patient. It'll all work out soon." That night, she didn't sleep. Something inside her shifted. Janet had always been a trusting type, not naive, but soft-hearted. She believed in second chances, in communication, in working things out. But now, she began to wonder if her marriage was built on a lie. Or worse, if the man she shared a bed with was hiding something that could kill her. And then came the financial statements. Janet had always let Franklin handle their finances. She trusted him completely. But something gnawed at her now. Something told her to look. So she did. And what she found made her blood run cold. Over $30,000 had been transferred from their joint accounts into one she'd never seen before, an account under Franklin's name alone. When she confronted him, his response wasn't denial. It was rage. "Don't start this paranoia again, Janet. You're getting old. You're imagining things. Maybe check your memory before accusing me." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Flat. Emotionless. Like he was talking to a stranger. Janet didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her marriage stopped being a sanctuary and became a countdown. Behind his charming smile and polite hellos, Franklin had been preparing for something that involved secrecy, distance, and a future where Janet no longer existed. He began researching life insurance policies in the dead of night, the kind that paid out in full regardless of cause of death. He increased her policy to a staggering $1.7 million just weeks after their anniversary, told the insurance agent it was just to be safe. No one suspected a thing, not even Janet, not fully. She didn't want to believe the worst. Who would, after 3 decades together? How could she think the man who brought her morning tea could be plotting her death? And yet, she felt it, that bone-deep chill. That creeping sensation that the man across the dinner table was no longer her husband, but a stranger wearing his face. Franklin, on the other hand, thought he had it all under control. He'd laid the groundwork, isolated her, gaslit her, secured the policy, transferred money to private accounts. To him, it was a clean plan. No loose ends. Just one final step before a lifetime of freedom and cash. But Franklin made one fatal mistake. He underestimated Janet Whitmore. He didn't know she had already made a quiet trip to a lawyer, that she'd begun documenting everything, from strange conversations to screenshots of bank transfers. He didn't know she'd written a letter to her niece titled, "If Anything Happens to Me," or that she'd secretly changed her with just 2 weeks prior. He didn't know that the woman he thought was an aging, gullible wife was actually 10 steps ahead. And so, to the world, they were still the perfect couple, but in reality, they were a match made in hell, teetering on the edge of a deadly betrayal. One had murder on his mind. The other had a plan of her own. And by the time the truth surfaced, it would leave an entire community shaken, and a killer exposed by the very woman he thought he had silenced forever. Janet sat in the kitchen, the morning light bleeding through the lace curtains. Her teacup trembled slightly in her hand. She hadn't slept much again. The house was quiet, too quiet. She used to love the silence of retirement. Now it felt like an alarm that never rang. Franklin walked in, buttoning his shirt. His face held that same detached expression she'd grown used to over the past few months. Not angry, not warm, just nothing. "You're up early," he said, barely glancing at her. "I never went to sleep," she replied softly. He didn't ask why. She watched him move, every motion deliberate. He'd been doing that lately, moving like a man with a schedule, a mission. He didn't linger at the breakfast table anymore. No morning kisses, no small talk about the newspaper. Just coffee, just routine. Janet stared down into her tea. "You didn't come home until after one last night." Franklin's hand froze just a second too long over the coffee pot. "Had some things to finish at the office." "You retired in March." He turned slowly, meeting her eyes. "Then maybe I was with friends. Does it matter?" She hated how calm he sounded, how effortlessly he erased accountability. It wasn't just the lying. It was how easy it came to him now, like breathing. Janet set her cup down. "I checked the bank statements." There it was. The shift. His jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. "You moved $30,000 from our savings into an account I've never seen before. You think I wouldn't notice?" He sighed. "I was investing. Something short-term. I didn't think you'd get yourself worked up about it." "I'm not worked up. I'm trying to understand why my husband is hiding money from me." Franklin turned away. "You're always so dramatic, Janet." Dramatic. That word. He'd been using it to dismiss her more and more, as if her suspicions were just the ramblings of an old woman slowly slipping out of touch. It was gaslighting, but said with such cool confidence that, for a while, she even believed him. "I found the insurance documents, too," she continued. "You increased my life insurance policy last month. $1.7 million, Franklin, without telling me." Still, he didn't flinch. "Just being responsible. You want to be taken care of if something happened to me. It's on me, not you." He finally turned to face her, eyes hard now. "So what are you suggesting? That I'm planning something? Do you hear yourself?" She stood, slow and controlled. "I hear everything. Even the conversations you think I'm not supposed to hear. I'm not stupid." He stepped closer. Too close. "Then don't act like it," he said. And with that, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. That night, Janet sat alone at the desk in their spare bedroom. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the red leather journal she hadn't touched in years. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. "If anything happens to me, Franklin is the only person who stands to benefit. Please look into the insurance policy. Ask Emily about the call I made last Thursday. There's a pattern. I see it now." She paused. Her hand trembled slightly. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. Something inside her was screaming, "Prepare." She clicked open her email and began forwarding documents to her niece. Bank statements, insurance changes, photos of envelopes addressed to secret P.O. boxes she found tucked into Franklin's coat pocket. She'd made copies. She wasn't going to confront him again. Not yet. That had only made things worse. She didn't need a fight. She needed proof. Franklin, meanwhile, was having dinner in a booth at a roadside diner 20 miles out. Across from him sat a woman named Melissa, early 40s, blonde, heavily made up. She was laughing at something he said, touching his wrist. "You sure she doesn't suspect anything?" she asked, sipping her wine. "She suspect a lot," Franklin muttered. "But she's too tired to do anything. And anyway, it's almost done." Melissa leaned in. "And then it's just you and me, huh?" He didn't smile. $1.7 million goes a long way," he said. "More than enough for a fresh start. Somewhere quiet. Warm. You like Arizona?" Melissa raised her eyebrows. "You're really going to go through with it." "I told you I would." She blinked. "How?" He smiled then, cold and calculating. "You don't need the details. Just know that it'll look natural. Like she went to sleep and never woke up. She's had high blood pressure for years. Heart failure wouldn't raise questions." Melissa's fingers trembled slightly as she picked at her food. "And if it doesn't work?" "It will," Franklin said firmly. "She's already fading. You can see it. She's tired, distracted. I just need a little more time." 3 days later, Janet received a call from her lawyer. He confirmed that the amended will have been filed. The policy Franklin didn't know about, the one that cut him out entirely, was now official. In the event of her death, the $1.7 million would go to her niece, Emily. Janet felt a wave of conflicting emotions, sadness, fear, and a flicker of relief. She hadn't told Emily everything. Not yet, but she would. She just needed time. Franklin came home that night with takeout and a soft smile. The sudden shift unsettled her. "I figured you didn't want to cook," he said, placing the bags on the table. She said nothing, just watched. He opened wine, poured her a glass. "To us," he said. She raised her glass with a steady hand. "To the truth," she whispered. He chuckled, not realizing she meant something very different. They ate, talked, laughed even, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the old days. But it was just an illusion, a calm before the storm. Because Janet wasn't the woman she used to be. And Franklin was exactly the man she feared he was. They both knew something was coming. But only one of them knew how it would end. The first attempt was subtle. Franklin had offered to make Janet tea one evening. Chamomile, her favorite. He'd never done that before, not in all their years together. It should have felt sweet, but it didn't. It felt strategic. She pretended to drink it, let the cup sit untouched beside her for nearly an hour while she watched an old movie on the couch. Franklin peeked in twice, eyeing the cup with growing impatience. When he finally asked, "Didn't you like the tea?" Janet replied, "I forgot it was there," and watched the corner of his mouth twitch, just slightly. She dumped the cold tea down the bathroom sink that night and flushed the cup with boiling water. The next morning, her hand shook as she searched online for symptoms of digitalis poisoning. Heart arrhythmia, confusion, sudden death. She said nothing. Franklin wasn't rushing. That was never his style. He preferred quiet control. He was methodical, patient, manipulative. He began slipping into her routines, offering to draw her bath, prep her meals, even pick up her medication. He spoke in soft tones now, as if rehearsing sympathy. His phone stayed locked. His eyes never lingered on her longer than necessary. He'd done his research. A fatal dose could mimic natural heart failure in someone her age. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. A grieving husband. A clean payout. He just had to wait for the right night. And it came. A rainy Thursday in early October. Janet had been feeling ill all day. She told Franklin so, not because she trusted him, but because she wanted to see what he'd do with that information. He didn't disappoint. "Why don't you lie down early?" he said gently, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "I'll make you some warm milk. Just rest, okay?" She went to bed around 8 p.m., fully clothed beneath the covers. Her phone clutched to her hand under the pillow. Franklin brought her the drink around 8:30. She pretended to sip, smiling weakly. He sat beside her for a while, stroked her hand. He even looked like he might cry. But when he finally left the room, closing the door behind him with the quiet of a practiced hand, Janet moved fast. She poured the milk into a travel shampoo bottle she kept hidden in her nightstand, screwed the cap tight, texted Emily just 3 words: "Save everything now." Then she lay back and waited. Around 2:17 a.m., Franklin returned. Janet heard the creak of the hallway floorboards. The doorknob turned slowly, then opened. She kept her breathing low, steady, pretending to sleep. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, then walked in. She felt the weight shift on the edge of the mattress. A pause, then the faint rustle of something, plastic, maybe gloves? Her heart pounded in her ears. Then his hand was on her wrist, checking her pulse. She didn't move. He waited, and when he was convinced she was dead, he stood, walked to the door, and turned off the light. Janet didn't move until she heard the front door close behind him at 2:43 a.m. By the time paramedics arrived at 7:06 a.m., called by a frantic, weeping Franklin, Janet was cold, but not because of death. She had kept herself near the open window for hours to lower her body temperature, to make the scene more convincing. The sleeping pill she'd taken hours earlier made her sluggish, but conscious. She didn't respond to the EMTs, didn't open her eyes. Franklin rode in the ambulance, clutching her hand, whispering to her like a loving husband, all for show. But what he didn't know was that Janet had hidden the bottle of milk in her purse. What he didn't know was that the nurse who took her blood later that morning would run a tox screen at her niece's request. And what he definitely didn't know was that every document, email, and journal entry Janet had compiled over the past month had already been sent to a private investigator. Franklin sat in the hospital's family waiting room, calm, collected. He imagined the next steps: the death certificate, the funeral, the payout. Melissa. But just as he was about to get up for coffee, a detective in a navy jacket entered the room and quietly asked him to follow her. Down the hallway, through a side corridor, into a small conference room where 2 other detectives waited. Franklin's smile twitched. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Detective Alvarez tilted her head. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about your wife's insurance policy and her recent tox screening." He blinked. "What do you mean, tox screening?" "She's dead." "No, Mr. Whitmore, she isn't." Silence. "She's resting, stable, and when she wakes up, she's going to tell us everything." For the first time in weeks, Franklin couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. He didn't know it yet, but his plan, the one he spent months crafting, had already collapsed, and it was Janet who had pulled the thread. Janet woke to a dim hospital room, the soft beep of machines pulsing in the background. Her chest ached, her mouth dry, but she was alive. And more importantly, he didn't know she was awake. A nurse leaned over her, gently adjusting her fore. "You're safe, Mrs. Whitmore. You've been through a lot, but the doctors say you'll recover." Janet tried to speak, but her throat burned. "You don't need to talk," the nurse said with a kind smile. "They already know everything. Your niece brought us the documents. The toxicology report confirmed your suspicion." Janet's eyes welled up. A mix of exhaustion, relief, and grief rippled through her body. But she nodded just once. It was done. Or, at least, it was beginning. Hours later, Detective Alvarez entered the room, carrying a folder thick with evidence and a voice recorder. "Mrs. Whitmore," she began gently, "I know this is difficult, but we need your help finishing what you started." Janet's voice was hoarse but steady. "He tried to kill me. We believe you. We've already collected the wine glass, the teacup, and the milk you preserved. There were traces of digoxin in all of them, enough to trigger a cardiac episode. You were smart not to drink them." Janet looked down at her hands. "I knew he was slipping something in. I just didn't know when he'd actually go through with it." Alvarez leaned forward. "What you did, leaving the window open, lowering your body temperature, pretending to sleep, that likely saved your life. But more than that, the trail you left, it's airtight. You outmaneuvered him." Janet managed a faint smile. "I had to make sure that even if I didn't survive, he'd never get a penny." 3 days earlier, Janet had met privately with her lawyer, Michael Brandt, in a small corner office in town. She handed him a sealed envelope containing copies of every damning document. Emails Franklin thought were deleted, bank transfers to a secret account in Melissa's name, and a second hidden will. "I need to make sure," she said firmly, "that he has no legal claim to my estate." Brant reviewed the files, eyebrows raised. "This is extensive." Janet leaned in. "If I die under any suspicious circumstances, I want this turned over to the police immediately. An insurance company." Brant nodded slowly. "I'll make sure of it. Do you think he'll actually?" She met his eyes. "Yes." The day before her death, Janet placed a small nanny cam in the corner of their bedroom, hidden in a fake smoke detector. It had motion sensors and night vision. She'd tested it twice. She left it running the night Franklin crept in and checked her pulse. The footage was chilling. Detective Alvarez pressed pause on the grainy black and white video. In the clip, Franklin knelt beside the bed, whispering, "It's better this way. You're tired. You won't feel a thing." Alvarez exhaled. That alone will bury him in court. Janet watched without blinking. "He thought I was too old, too slow, too fragile to fight back." Alvarez smiled grimly. "He thought wrong." Franklin didn't go quietly. At the station, he denied everything, claimed Janet was mentally unstable, suicidal, and delusional, that she drank something by mistake, or perhaps was faking the entire thing for sympathy. But the detectives didn't need his cooperation. They had motive, opportunity, a toxicology report, digital records of his financial planning with Melissa, the forged insurance updates, and video of him hovering over what he thought was Janet's lifeless body. Worst of all, Melissa turned on him within 24 hours. "He told me he put something in her tea," she confessed in a written statement. "He promised it'd be painless. He said he'd done research, said she was tired, that nobody would question it." When asked why she was confessing, Melissa answered simply, "I didn't sign up to be an accomplice to murder. He told me she was cold, cruel, a burden, but she was smart. She fought." Janet remained at the hospital another week, recovering, rebuilding, resting, for the first time in years. Emily visited daily. "He's been denied bail," she told her aunt gently one afternoon. "They're holding him until trial. Attempted murder. Fraud. Conspiracy. The DA says he's going away for a long time." Janet stared out the window. The October wind rustled the trees, sending golden leaves tumbling through the air. "I trusted him," she said softly. "For 38 years. I trusted him with my life. And he almost took it." Emily reached over and squeezed her hand. "But he didn't. You won, and Janet." Janet shook her head. "It's not about winning. It's about surviving with your soul intact." She closed her eyes and let the sunlight touch her face. He thought she was weak. He thought she'd fall apart. But in the end, she outsmarted the man who once claimed to love her. And now, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, while she lived hers, finally free. The trial began 6 months later, in a packed courtroom lined with journalists, former neighbors, and strangers who had followed the headlines like a soap opera. The story of Franklin Whitmore, the husband who tried to kill his 67-year-old wife for $1.7 million, had become national news. But for Janet, it was never about the spectacle. It was about truth and closure. She sat in the front row every day, her silver hair neatly pinned back, dressed in soft grays and navy blues, never black. She refused to mourn a man who was still alive, still pretending to be innocent. Franklin, on the other hand, looked gaunt, a shadow of the self-assured man she once knew. In court, he wore a cheap suit that didn't quite fit, his wedding ring removed. He rarely looked at her, but when he did, there was no remorse in his eyes, only disbelief that he'd been beaten at his own game. The prosecution's case was airtight. They presented emails, financial statements, the altered insurance policies, and text messages to Melissa outlining the plan. But it was a hidden bedroom footage, the moment Franklin whispered his final goodbye, thinking Janet was dead, that shattered any remaining doubt. When the video played in court, a silence fell so heavy it felt like a weight. Franklin's voice on the recording was soft, calculated, intimate. "It's better this way. You're tired. You won't feel a thing." Gasps broke the silence. One juror covered her mouth. And still, Franklin sat motionless, expressionless, as if none of it mattered. But it did. Janet took the stand on the fifth day. The courtroom held its breath as she approached, slow but steady. When asked why she had stayed silent so long, her voice didn't shake. Because I was scared. Because when you've been married to someone for nearly 40 years, you start to believe that love means forgiveness, even when it hurts you. She paused. But love doesn't mean erasing yourself to make someone else comfortable. I trusted Franklin with my heart, my life, my future, and he tried to take it all for money. The courtroom hung on every word. I didn't outsmart him because I was vengeful, she said. I did it because I didn't want to die knowing he got away with it. Melissa Langley also testified. Reluctantly, her plea deal required it. She looked down at her hands the entire time. Franklin said his wife was sick and depressed, she told court. He said she wouldn't live much longer anyway, and that all we had to do was wait. But then he started talking about speeding things up. That's when I panicked. She wiped her eyes. He told me she'd had her time, that we deserved a future now. The courtroom watched as the illusion Franklin had built of the devoted husband, the charming retiree, crumbled piece by piece. It took the jury only 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Attempted first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Franklin sat frozen as the words were read aloud. No outburst. No tears. Just quiet disbelief. Like a man still struggling to understand how he lost. But the sentence wasn't light. Life in prison with no possibility of parole. Justice had been served. At least legally. After the verdict, Janet left the courthouse through a back exit, flanked by her niece and lawyer. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name. But she didn't speak to any of them. She went home, alone. The house was exactly as she left it. The faint smell of lavender still lingered in the hallway. The bed was made. The old photos were still on the mantel. But something had shifted, something permanent. In the weeks that followed, Janet found herself waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding. The trauma wasn't gone. It had only changed shape. No longer fear of dying, but grief for what was lost. Not Franklin. She didn't mourn the man he turned out to be. But the years, the trust, the pieces of herself she had given away. Thinking it was love, she met with a therapist twice a week, tried yoga, wrote in a journal daily. Some days she felt strong. Others, she just stared out the window, wondering what her life could have been. Emily visited often. You should be proud, she told her. You save yourself. Janet smiled faintly. Yes, but I shouldn't have had to. Months later, Janet received a letter from prison. She didn't open it right away. For days, it sat untouched on the kitchen table. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unmistakably his. When she finally tore it open, there were only a few lines inside. I don't understand how you did it. I loved you in my own way, but you were always smarter than me. F. She burned the letter that same night, not out of rage, but finality, because sometimes justice comes too late to fix the damage, too late to erase the betrayal, too late to reclaim the years lost to manipulation and fear. But it comes, and when it does, you stand in its light, not because it saved you, but because it proves you were never crazy, never weak, never wrong. Janet didn't just survive her husband, she exposed him, and that, in the end, was enough.